6 months after my wife died, I sold the house my 2 children thought they would one day inherit. I didn't tell them. No warning. No discussion. No asking for their opinion. I just signed the papers, packed my things, and left. By the time my son called to ask what the plan was for Thanksgiving that year, the house had already belonged to someone else for 3 weeks. The silence on the other end of the line lasted nearly 10 seconds. Then he asked the question that some of you are probably thinking right now. Dad, have you lost your mind? No. I was completely sane. In fact, it was probably the smartest decision I had made in all 57 years of my life. My name is Tom. And before you judge me, there's something you need to understand. I didn't sell the house because I needed money. I didn't sell it because I was drowning in debt. And I certainly didn't sell it because I hated my children. Let me tell you what it cost me to stay. My wife Carol died in February. Pancreatic cancer, the kind that doesn't give you time to prepare, only time to watch. 9 weeks from the morning she came home from the doctor with a look I had never seen on her face before, to the afternoon I sat next to a hospital bed that had stopped needing me. She was 54. She had a folder on her laptop titled, "Someday Croatia," full of photographs of stone villages and turquoise water and open-air restaurants perched on cliffs above the sea. We never went to Croatia. I found the folder 3 months after the funeral, and I sat at her desk for an hour, just scrolling through photographs of a place she never got to stand. If you want to understand the shape of my grief, start there. That folder. That one word, someday, in the title. I am telling you this so you understand what kind of hole I was left standing next to. Not a hole in my schedule or my social calendar, but a hole in the center of everything. Carol was the architecture. When she left, the building stayed standing. The walls, the roof, the Japanese maple in the backyard that we'd planted together and that had grown into something magnificent. All of it stayed. But the person who made it mean something had been gone since February, and no amount of staying in the house was going to change that. Carol and I had been married 28 years. She was the person who translated the world for me. She noticed when I was withdrawing before I noticed it myself. She called my sister Diane on my behalf when I was too proud to reach out and too stubborn to admit I needed to. She held the entire architecture of our family together with stubbornness and warmth and a Sunday chili that people still ask me about. When she died, I was 57 years old, living in the Eastmoreland neighborhood of Portland, Oregon, with a big kitchen and a backyard and 4 family members within reasonable driving distance. That detail, the driving distance, is the thread this whole story hangs on. Let me give you the cast, because this story has one. Diane is my older sister, 59, lives in Lake Oswego, 35 minutes from my front door, not counting bridge traffic. She has been in the same house since 1998. She is organized and capable and has strong opinions about how a funeral buffet should be arranged, which she shared with me approximately 48 hours after my wife died. I am not holding that against her. Grief makes people reach for what they can control. Paula is my younger sister, 53, lives in Salem, about an hour 40 away. Busy in the way younger sisters are always busy, a business, a full calendar, a schedule always at capacity. She called me after the funeral and said, "Tom, whatever you need, I mean it. Anything at all." I believed her. You believe people when they say it like that, with that particular weight. Megan is my daughter, 27 when Carol died. Lives in Beaverton with her husband Derek and their 2 kids, Lily and Sam, who was barely 2 at the time. 40 minutes away. 40 minutes. Kyle is my son, 25. He lives 11 minutes from my front door. I know because I drove it once, the way you do when you are trying to confirm that your reality is actually your reality and you are not being unreasonable. 11 minutes. 1 song on the radio. That is my family. 4 people, all within reach. They showed up for the funeral. There is free food and a socially acceptable reason to cry, so attendance is generally solid. They wore dark colors. They hugged me. Diane gave a reading. Kyle helped carry the casket. Megan cried in a way that broke my heart open because it was real. I could see that it was real. Paula drove up from Salem and squeezed my hand and said things I do not remember but know were kind. They were there, and then they left. And what happened next is the part nobody put in any sympathy card. The first months, I cooked. I cooked because Carol had been the cook in our house for 28 years, and in her absence, I discovered that I was actually capable of it. that standing at the stove with something requiring my full attention was the nearest thing to peace I could find. I made chili and roast chicken and braised short ribs, and the stuffed peppers she used to make on the first cold weekend of every fall. I packaged everything into labeled containers, and I called my family and I said, "Come over." And they did. Those first Sundays were loud. Derek and Megan crowded into the kitchen. Kyle brought beer and ate with the enthusiasm of a 25-year-old who doesn't cook for himself. Diane reorganized my spice rack. Paula talked too fast about everything, which is how Paula handles situations she doesn't know how to handle. The grandkids ran in the backyard. I stood in Carol's kitchen, my kitchen surrounded by that particular noise, and I thought, okay, we are going to be okay. I was wrong, but not yet. The Sundays continued. I kept cooking, kept calling, kept setting the table for however many people said yes. And slowly, so slowly, I almost failed to notice until it was too late to pretend otherwise. They stopped coming, not all at once. That would have been too obvious, too easy to name. Instead, it was a fade, a gentle withdrawal, each absence wrapped in something reasonable. Diane had a thing, Paula had a work situation, Derek and Megan were slammed with the kids. Kyle said rain check. Rain checks don't collect themselves. I learned that. About 4 months after Carol died, I called Kyle on a Sunday afternoon. He let it ring. He texted back 2 hours later one sentence. "Can't tonight, sorry. Next week?" Next week came and went. The text sat in my phone like a small, polite door slowly closing. I want to be precise about the timeline, because I think it matters. I am not describing years later, when grief had faded and life had resumed a reasonable shape. I am describing the first year, the year when sympathy cards were still stacked on the kitchen table. The year I was still accidentally buying 2 of everything at the grocery store, 2 yogurts, 2 packages of the coffee she liked, and standing in the cereal aisle staring at my cart like a man who had briefly forgotten who he was shopping for. In that first year, my family called me a combined total of, and I counted, because apparently this is who grief had made me 14 times. 14 calls, between 4 people. Over 12 months, Diane called 4 times. Paula called 3. Megan called 5. But one of those was clearly a pocket dial because she seemed confused when I answered. Kyle called twice. One of those was to ask about a fishing rod from a trip we'd taken together in 2018. I kept a note in my phone. I didn't know yet what the note was for. I just kept it. Year 2. Still cooking. Still calling. I want you to understand that I was not passive in any of this. I was not the kind of man who suffers silently and then resents the world for not reading his mind. I called. I invited. I drove to Megan's house in Beaverton twice without being invited, just to see Lily and Sam, just to have a Saturday afternoon that felt like something. The second time, I sat in their driveway for nearly 15 minutes before going to the door, because I was embarrassed. Me, in my late 50s, embarrassed to knock on my own daughter's door uninvited. Sit with that for a moment because I think it matters. A man who raised her, who drove 40 minutes to see his grandchildren on a Saturday, sitting alone in a car working up the nerve to ring the bell. She answered with surprise that was half a second too honest. "Dad." "Hey, we were actually just about to head out." Derek was in the living room behind her in basketball shorts with a bag of chips and a remote control. They were not heading out. "Oh, that's fine," I said. "I was just in the neighborhood. I lived 40 minutes away. I drove home and ate leftover chicken alone and went to bed at 8:30. Year 3, Year 4. I began to understand something I had not wanted to understand, which is the difference between a family that is busy and a family that has quietly, without malice, without even fully realizing it, stopped treating you as a priority. I was still there. My number had not changed. My address had not changed. I cooked every Sunday. My freezer filled up slowly with labeled containers. Chicken stew, short ribs, turkey soup, and I started thinking of it as a freezer of unanswered invitations. A museum of optimism. The specific optimism of a man who keeps cooking for people who have stopped coming, because stopping would mean admitting something he is not yet ready to admit. My therapist, Dr. Okafor, told me I needed to communicate directly. "Don't assume they can feel your needs," she said. "Tell them." So I tried that. I sat down with Diane around Year 4, and I said, "Diane, I need you to know that I'm struggling. I'm lonely, not in a casual way. I mean, I'm genuinely having a hard time, and I feel invisible, and I need my family to show up for me." She looked at me with genuine, warm, completely useless love and said, "Tom, you know we adore you. It's just the drive, you know, and everyone's schedule." She reached across the table and patted my hand. "We'll do better." She didn't do better. I called Paula. Same conversation, different city. I said I needed more contact, that the effort had been one-directional for years, that I didn't know what I was doing wrong. She cut me off. "Tom, you can't be so heavy about everything. We all have our own stuff. You have to stop making everything so hard to be around. You have to stop making everything so hard to be around." I thought about Carol's Croatia folder. Someday. I thought about the way she used to reach over in the car and put her hand on my knee without saying anything, just there, just present. I thought about how she was gone, and I was on the phone being told I was too heavy. I hung up and sat in the kitchen for a long time. Something in me shifted, not broke, shifted. Like a weight moving into a new position, settling into something it might hold for a while. Honestly, and I want to be honest with you here, if someone had said that to me after 2 years of losing the person I loved most, I don't know that I could have stayed as measured as Thomas did. I think something in me would have broken in a much louder direction. The fact that he didn't, the fact that he just hung up and sat in the kitchen, that silence is, I think, the beginning of the real story, not the end of the pain. The moment the pain became a decision. Year 6, Kyle called me. Not a text, an actual phone call, his name lighting up on the screen in a way that made my chest move. He was in financial trouble. The details were messy and specific, and I will not go into them because the details are not the point. He needed $22,000, and he needed it within 3 weeks. And he called me and said, "Dad, I know I haven't been great, I know that. But you've always come through for me, and I trust you more than anyone." And I gave it to him, every penny, because he was my son, because Carol would have, because some part of me, the stubborn, hopeful part that had been running on fumes for 6 years, genuinely believed this might be the thing. That this act of trust might crack whatever shell had grown around my family and let some light in. He paid me back. I want to be fair about this. It took 20 months, and he paid every dollar in regular installments. And during those 20 months, he called consistently. He came to Sunday dinners. He called on my birthday. He sent a short text on the anniversary of Carol's death. Nothing elaborate, just a line, but it was there. The month he made the final payment, the phone went quiet. I'm not saying he did it consciously. I'm saying it doesn't matter whether he did. Year 8. Year 9. My 66th birthday fell on a Sunday and I made a full dinner. Roast chicken with herbs under the skin the way Carol had showed me. Roasted root vegetables. A cake I'd made from scratch because I'd been teaching myself to bake in the quiet hours. I set the table for 5 people. I called everyone. Megan said she'd try. Kyle said probably. Diane sent a balloon emoji. Paula called in the morning for 6 minutes and spent 3 of them discussing a neighbor's fence. Nobody came. Nobody came. I sat at a table, set for 5, and I ate alone. And I need you to understand what that feels like. Not the hot, sharp grief of fresh loss, but something cooler and stranger. The sorrow of someone who can see with absolute clarity exactly what is and is not happening. Who loves the people involved, still loves them, and is standing with that love in his hands like something he no longer knows what to do with. I looked at the empty chairs. I thought, Carol, what do I do? She didn't answer. She's been gone 9 years. She doesn't answer anymore. But I waited anyway, the way you wait when you already know the answer, and you're just not ready to say it out loud. Then I ate my chicken. Then I did the dishes. Then I went to bed. And in the weeks after that birthday, slowly and then all at once, I made up my mind. If you've ever sat in a room waiting for someone who said they'd come and they didn't, if you've ever set a table for more people than showed up, if you've ever called someone who let it ring, if you've ever driven to a place you weren't invited because you needed to exist in someone's life badly enough to embarrass yourself about it, then you already understand something about what came next. You understand that there is a point after which hope stops being a virtue and becomes a form of self-harm. A point after which continuing to reach toward people who have stopped reaching back is not love. It is denial. I had been in denial for 9 years. I didn't tell anyone. That was the first and most important rule. I found a real estate agent not local, a woman from a firm in a suburb I'd had no reason to visit, and I had the house assessed. Carol's house. Our house. The house where I'd raised Megan and Kyle, where we'd planted the Japanese maple, where I had hosted 9 years of Sunday dinners that fewer and fewer people attended. Assessed at $460,000. I said, "List it." She gave me the look people give when they're waiting for you to reconsider. "Do you want to take some time to?" "I've had 9 years," I said. "List it." It sold in 11 days. Cash buyer. A young couple in their 30s. Pregnant. A dog. Full of plans. They wanted to close in 3 weeks. I said that works perfectly. While the house was in escrow, I reorganized my finances into accounts that were harder to locate quickly. Nothing illegal, I want to be clear. I wasn't hiding assets. I was simply preparing to become someone who needed time before being found. I got a new phone number and gave it to no one. I closed the social media accounts Carol had originally set up for us, both those small windows into a life that no longer existed in the shape it had once held. I found an apartment, not in Portland, not near Portland. A small 2-bedroom place in a town called Cedar Reach, 3.5 hours southeast, in the high desert country near a reservoir that shone silver in the mornings like something out of a photograph Carol would have saved to her Croatia folder. I packed what mattered. It wasn't much. Her photographs, the quilt her mother had made, the cast-iron skillet that had been in her family since before I knew her, my books, my clothes. I left the furniture. I left the dining table with its 5-place settings. I left the freezer full of labeled containers. On the last morning, I walked through every room. I stood in the kitchen a long time. Then I locked the front door, put the key in an envelope for the realtor, and drove away without looking in the mirror. Cedar Reach is the kind of town that people find when they are looking for the particular freedom of not being expected anywhere. Everyone is friendly. The hardware store owner will spend 20 minutes finding the right washer. But the people who end up there have chosen their quiet deliberately, and they understand that about each other, and they leave you to it. I found a walking trail around the reservoir 6 miles, if you do the full loop. I started doing the full loop every morning. Just me in the cold air and the blunt opinions of desert birds. I cooked, but now I cooked for one, which sounds like the saddest sentence in the world, but there is something clean about it. You make what you want. You eat when you want. No labeled containers for people who stopped coming. No museum of unanswered invitations in the freezer. Just dinner. Just food. Just the smell of something good in a kitchen that asked nothing of me. I found a used bookshop on the main street, run by a man with very strong opinions about which Cormac McCarthy novel is the one that matters. He is wrong. I have not fully committed to telling him yet. We argue on Tuesday mornings. It is the best part of my week. 6 weeks after I arrived, the silence broke from their end. Diane called my old number. Disconnected. Megan tried the house landline, also gone, called Diane, who called Paula, who called Kyle, and apparently the 4 of them had a conversation in which each person quietly arrived at the same question. When had they last actually spoken to him? I'm told the answers were not flattering to anyone. Megan drove to the house, the sold house, and found a young woman at the door with a baby on one hip and paint samples in her other hand. Megan stood on the porch of her childhood home looking at a stranger's furniture through the window. "My father used to live here," she said. The woman said, "We bought it about 6 weeks ago." I imagined my daughter on that porch doing the specific math of neglect. Kyle tried to file a missing persons report. The police told him that a 66-year-old man with no signs of distress who had legally sold his house and closed his accounts was not missing. He left. He was not available. He was not in danger. He was simply gone. Kyle, I'm told, did not receive this well. Diane hired a finder, which is apparently a profession, to locate me. It took 3 months. I was not particularly hidden. My real name was on the lease, on the library card, on the gym membership by the reservoir. I had simply not told anyone where I was. There is a surprisingly large difference between those two things. A difference I had 9 years to begin understanding. I came back from my morning walk on a Thursday to find a car in the lot I didn't recognize. My daughter Megan was sitting on the front steps of my building. She'd been crying not recently, but the infrastructure was fully in place, the way a storm is still in the air after the rain stops. She looked up when she heard my footsteps. "Dad." "Megan, we didn't know where you were." I thought about 14 phone calls in 12 months. I thought about sitting in her driveway for 15 minutes. I thought about the birthday table set for 5 people. "I know," I said. "That was somewhat the point." She started crying then, fully. How could you do this? We were terrified. Kyle hasn't slept, she stopped. You just left. Without telling anyone. How could you just leave? I sat down on the step next to her, not close enough to offer a hug. I wanted this moment to be real without being softened. Megan, what day is my birthday? She stopped. What? My birthday. The date. Dad, don't do this. What's the date? A pause. October 4th. October 11th. I've had the same birthday for 66 years. She wiped her eyes. The reservoir was flat and silver through the line of cottonwood trees across the street. A long quiet sat between us. How many times did you call me last year, before I left? Dad, I'm not asking to wound you. I'm asking because I want you to understand that I already know the answer. I counted. Another long pause. She looked at her hands. I don't know, she said. Quieter. 5. And one of those was an accident, Megan. You called by mistake and seemed confused when I answered. She didn't look up. I kept cooking, I said. Every Sunday for 9 years. I set the table. I called. I drove to your house and sat in your driveway for 15 minutes before knocking because I was too embarrassed to just show up at my own daughter's door. I told Diane I was lonely. I told Paula I was struggling. I gave Kyle $22,000 and watched him come around for exactly as long as the debt existed. Your mother died, and slowly, quietly, all 4 of you moved on. And I understand that life moves. I understand I'm not a child, but I was right there, in that house, every Sunday, and you all just stopped showing up. Dad, I'm sorry. I know you are. Right now you are, because I'm not where you expected me to be. I said it gently, but I said it. She had Carol's eyes, the exact shape of them. It was always the easiest and hardest thing about looking at my children. So what happens now? She asked. Now I live here, I said. This is where I live. A long silence. You're not coming back. Back to what, Megan? She didn't have an answer. I went inside, made coffee for one, and let her drive back the way she came. Diane showed up 2 weeks later. Same parking lot, same hesitation. I watched from the window as she sat in her car working up the nerve. She rang the buzzer. I let it ring twice before I answered. She sat at my kitchen table and looked around at the apartment, Carol's photographs, the quilt, the skillet on the stove with the expression of someone who expected chaos and found a clean kitchen and fresh coffee instead. You seem, she started. Fine, I said. I seem fine. Tom, I need you to understand how frightened we all were. I set my mug down. How many times did you call me last year? Before I left. She opened her mouth. Closed it. I'll help you. 4. You called me 4 times in 12 months. You live 35 minutes away. I told you I was lonely and you said we'd do better, and then did not, in fact, do better. The apartment was very quiet. I know, she said. I know, and I'm sorry, Tom. Truly. She meant it. Diane has never been dishonest. The sorrow on her face was real, genuine, completely arrived at. Are you going to forgive us? I looked at her. I looked at Carol's photograph on the shelf behind her shoulder. I thought about 9 years, 14 phone calls, a birthday table set for 5. No, I said. She stared at me. Tom. No, Diane. Tom, we're your family. You were. I picked up my mug. I love you. I will always love you. But love is not the same thing as access. You don't get to deprioritize someone for a decade and then arrive in tears and collect forgiveness like it's a package held at the post office. That is not how this works. So that's it? You're just done with us? I didn't end anything, Diane. I just stopped pretending something was still alive that you'd already let die. She left an hour later, crying the entire drive home. Megan called me that evening on purpose, no pocket dials to report this. I know because Megan calling on purpose was now notable. Dad, Diane is really upset, I know. What did you say to her? The truth. A pause. Are you going to let us back in? Megan, you're calling me right now. You know what I mean. I did know what she meant. She meant, is this permanent or is it a gesture? Is there a path back to Sunday dinners and holidays and the version of Dad who kept cooking for people who didn't come? I'm not angry, I told her. I want you to really hear that. I am not sitting here in some dark room. I am genuinely fine. I am, in fact, better than fine. A pause. That's almost scarier, she said quietly. Yeah, I said. I know, Paula called. I answered because I was curious what she'd say. What she said was, "Tom, what you've done is incredibly selfish." I laughed. A real laugh, from somewhere I hadn't expected. "Paula, that is the most you thing you have ever said to me. I'm serious. You can't erase your family because you're upset. I'm not upset. You clearly are, or you wouldn't have run away. Paula, do you remember what you said to me 2 years after Carol died? When I called and told you I was struggling, you told me I was too heavy. You said we all have our own stuff. Do you remember?" Silence. "I remember," she said. Quieter. "I took that advice," I said. "I stopped being heavy about it. I stopped feeling things about it. And eventually I just stopped being there altogether. So in a way, this is your suggestion. That's not fair," she said. "No," I agreed. "It really isn't." I let that sit between us for a moment. Then I said, "Goodbye, Paula," and I hung up. In the complete, definitive, final sense of that word, Kyle was last. He drove 3.5 hours on a Sunday. Of course he did. Kyle has never done anything quietly in his life. He stood at my door looking like a man who had been awake for 30 hours rehearsing a speech and losing faith in every version of it. Unshaven, dark circles, jaw tight. Something in his expression folded when I opened the door. I let him in. He looked at Carol's photographs on the shelf, and I watched something move across his face that I recognized because I had felt it myself, the specific pain of understanding exactly what you had, and exactly the moment you stopped paying attention to it. "Dad, I know I don't have any right to ask for anything," he started. His voice was already unsteady. "And I know sorry isn't the right size for what I owe you. But I need you to know," he stopped. He stopped and his jaw tightened, and when he looked at me, I could see him trying to hold something back and failing. "I missed Mom. After she died, every time I looked at you, I saw her. I heard her voice in the way you talked. I saw the way she used to look at you when you didn't know she was looking, and I couldn't handle any of it, so I just stopped looking. I know that's not an excuse. It's not even close to an excuse. It's the worst reason. But I kept not calling because calling meant facing it, and facing it meant she was really gone, and I wasn't ready, and then it had been months, and then more months, and I kept telling myself I'd fix it next week." He stopped. His voice broke. "And then I looked up and you were gone and there were strangers in our house." He was crying. Kyle, who I had not seen cry since the morning of Carol's funeral. And here's the thing about being someone's father, it never stops being the hardest thing in the world to watch your child suffer. Even when he's 25 and earned every tear. Even when you are the reason he's standing in a strange kitchen 3.5 hours from home with a broken face. Something in you reaches toward them. Something very old and very specific wants to say, "Sit down, I'll make coffee. It's all right." I let that part speak for just a moment. "Sit down," I said. "I'll make coffee." He sat. I made the coffee. I set a mug in front of him, and sat across the table and really looked at my son the way you look at someone when you are deciding something. And I said, "I believe you. Every word of it. You were scared and you ran, and running felt easier than facing it. And you told yourself tomorrow, and tomorrow stacked into years, and you didn't see the full weight of it until it was done. I believe all of that." He nodded, his eyes still wet, full of something fragile and waiting. "And it doesn't change anything." The hope left his face slowly, like light leaving a room at the end of a day. "Dad, Kyle, I gave you $22,000. I gave it because you were my son and I loved you, and because some part of me still believed that gestures of trust could repair what years had quietly broken. And for 20 months you showed up. You called. You came to dinner. You texted on the anniversary of her death. And the month you made the last payment, the phone went quiet." He said nothing. "You think I don't know the timing? You think I didn't count those days?" The coffee steamed between us. I spent 9 years making myself available to 4 people who treated that availability like a guarantee, like I would always be there. Like the chicken would always be in the oven, and the door would always open, and Dad would always be at the same number in the same house, with the table set and the light on. I walked to the window. The reservoir was silver and flat in the morning. "I am not angry at you. That is the most important thing I need you to hear. There is no anger in this room. Anger would mean I'm still invested in what you do next. I'm not. I've moved on. The same way all 4 of you moved on after your mother died. It turns out it's pretty straightforward once you commit to it." He sat with that for a long time. "So, there's nothing left," he said finally. "No way back. There's a way forward." but forward looks like two people with shared history who have dinner once a year somewhere neutral. It doesn't look like Sunday dinners and holiday tables and a father waiting by the phone. That version of me is retired. That's not a father, he said. That's a stranger. Yes, I said. It is. Welcome to how I felt for 9 years. He left before noon. He left his fishing rod by the door. I put it in the storage closet. I have not thought about it since. Here is what I need you to understand about what I did. This was not an impulse. This was not a breakdown. This was not a desperate bid for attention from a man losing his grip. This was a clear-eyed decision made after 9 years of evidence. I gave them 9 years of Sunday dinners. I gave them warnings explicit, direct, spoken out loud. I am lonely. I am struggling. I need my family. I was told I was too heavy, too sensitive, too much. I gave them money. I gave them my available hours, and my unanswered calls, and my embarrassing driveway vigils, and a birthday table set for ghosts. I gave them everything a reasonable person can give. And at a certain point, I gave them the only thing I had left, which was my absence. The thing nobody warns you about, the dramatic exit and the cool conversations and the life reassembled somewhere no one expected, the dirty secret of all of it, is that I don't miss them. Not the way I thought I would. Not the way I miss Carol, which is a missing so total it has become part of the landscape of who I am, something I carry without choosing and wouldn't put down even if I could. I thought I would miss the four of them like a limb. Phantom pain. Constant awareness of absence. Instead, I found that what I had been missing for 9 years was not them. It was the idea of them. The family we were when Carol was alive, and the house was full, and people showed up not because they'd been called, but because showing up was just what we did. That family ended when Carol died. I just needed 9 years to accept the notice. Now I walk 6 miles every morning around a reservoir that asks nothing of me. I argue about books on Tuesday mornings with a man who is slowly becoming the best friend I've had in 30 years. I cook well and sleep well, and wake up without the 3 in the morning dread that comes from loving people who have stopped thinking about you. My phone is quiet. I made it quiet. And every morning when I come back from the walk and sit down with Carol's photographs on the shelf and the light off the water through the window, I think about those 9 years, the Sundays, the frozen containers, the table set for 5, and I think, not anymore. And I drink my coffee, and it is the best coffee I have ever had. Carol, I've decided you're watching because the alternative is too quiet for me to live inside. I need you to know I finally did it. I finally stopped setting the table for people who weren't coming. I know you'd tell me to call them. You'd say they're just human and frightened, and doing the best they can, which is probably true. You were always better than me that way, the one who showed up when you were exhausted, who kept us all stitched together with stubbornness and love and that Sunday chili people still ask me about. But you're not here, and without you, it turns out, neither am I. Not the version who waited. Not the version who called. Not the version who sat alone on his birthday with a table set for 5 and still believed someone might come. That man stopped waiting. I booked the Croatia trip. 4 weeks after Kyle left, I opened your laptop. I kept it. I couldn't not. And I opened the folder. Someday Croatia. I looked at every photograph in it, all the stone villages and turquoise water and the restaurants on the cliffs. And then I went to a travel site and I booked it. Split first, then down the coast to Dubrovnik, then wherever the road suggests. I'm going to eat in restaurants where I don't speak the language and sit at outdoor tables above the water and watch strangers live their lives and be grateful for mine. I'm going to have the best meal of my life somewhere you never got to stand. And I'm going to raise a glass. Not to the family, just to you, the only person who ever made showing up feel like the most natural thing in the world. I'm going for both of us, Carol. Finally, before I go, if this story reached something in you, I want to know where you land. Drop a number in the comments. 1 if you think Thomas was right to leave and never look back. 2 if you think he should have given them one final, clear ultimatum before disappearing. 3 if you believe forgiveness is still possible and he should find a way forward with them. There's no wrong answer, and I genuinely want to know, because this story doesn't have an easy resolution, and that's exactly why it matters. Tell me where in the world you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I love knowing that someone in a completely different corner of this world is sitting with the same question I am. And if you've ever set a table for someone who didn't show up literally, or not leave a comment, you are not alone in that. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Every story we tell here deserves to be told. Thank you for being here. Truly. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in a Portland, Oregon setting to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is entirely coincidental.